Behind the golden gates of Buckingham Palace, where centuries of tradition meet modern reality, a storm was brewing that would test the very foundations of the British royal family. It wasn't about politics, scandals, or public opinion this time. It was something far more personal, far more devastating. When Kate Middleton, the Princess of Wales, received the phone call that would shatter her world into a million pieces, she never imagined that her greatest support would come from the most unexpected source. The same man who once seemed distant, formal, and unreachable would become her strongest ally in the darkest hour of her life. As palace walls echoed with whispered conversations and tense meetings, one woman's fury would clash against one man's unwavering determination to protect what mattered most. The crown had weathered many storms, but this one was different. This time, it was about family, loyalty, and the courage to stand up for what's right, even when it means facing the wrath of someone you love. What happens when tradition collides with compassion? When duty meets heart? When a king must choose between keeping peace and protecting his daughter-in-law from forces within his own household? This is the story of how Charles, King of England, discovered that sometimes being a true leader means standing firm, even when the person you're standing against is the woman you promised to love and honor. This is the story of how Kate learned that family isn't always about blood, but about who stands beside you when the world feels like it's falling apart. And this is the story of how Camilla's anger, fierce and burning like wildfire, eventually faded into a silence so heavy it could be felt in every corner of Windsor Castle. The morning sun filtered through the tall windows of Adelaide Cottage as Kate Middleton sat at her kitchen table, watching her children eat their breakfast. George was carefully spreading marmalade on his toast. Charlotte was giggling at something Louis had whispered, and, for a moment, everything felt perfectly normal. These quiet family moments had become precious to Kate, especially after all the public scrutiny and royal duties that filled most of her days. Her phone buzzed against the wooden table, displaying her doctor's name on the screen. Kate's heart skipped a beat. She had been waiting for these test results for over a week, trying to push away the growing worry that had been eating at her since she first noticed the symptoms. She stepped away from the breakfast table, walking toward the garden door for privacy. "Mrs. Cambridge," Dr. Harrison's voice was gentle but serious. "I'm afraid I have some difficult news to share with you." The world seemed to slow down around Kate as she listened to words that would change her life forever. Cancer, treatment, chemotherapy, surgery. The clinical terms felt foreign and terrifying as they settled into her mind. She found herself gripping the doorframe, her knees suddenly weak. "How long?" she managed to whisper, her voice barely audible. "With proper treatment, the prognosis is very good," Dr. Harrison assured her. "But we'll need to start immediately. The next few months will be challenging, but you're young and strong." "We caught this early." Kate closed her eyes, trying to process what this meant for her children, for William, for her royal duties, for everything she had worked so hard to build. When she opened them again, George was standing in the doorway, looking at her with concern in his young eyes. "Mummy, are you okay?" he asked, his breakfast forgotten. Kate quickly ended the call and knelt down to George's level, forcing a smile she didn't feel. "Of course, darling. Mummy's just fine." But as she hugged her eldest son, Kate knew that nothing would ever be the same again. The next few hours passed in a blur of phone calls and arrangements. She called William first, reaching him just as he was about to board a helicopter for an official engagement. The sound of her voice, shaky and small, made him cancel everything immediately. By afternoon, Kate found herself in the drawing room at Kensington Palace, facing William, Charles, and Camilla. The weight of their concerned gazes felt almost as heavy as the diagnosis itself. William sat beside her, holding her hand tightly, his jaw clenched with barely contained emotion. "The children don't know yet," Kate said quietly, her voice hoarse from crying. "I need to find the right way to tell them." Charles leaned forward in his chair, his face etched with worry. "Kate, my dear, please know that you have our complete support. Whatever you need, whatever the children need, we're here." Kate nodded gratefully, but when she looked at Camilla, she noticed something different. While Charles and William showed nothing but concern and love, Camilla's expression was harder to read. There was sympathy there, certainly, but also something else. Something that made Kate's stomach tighten with unease. "Of course, we'll need to consider the implications for the royal schedule," Camilla said carefully. "The upcoming tour, the charity galas, the Christmas engagements. People are counting on these events." The room fell silent. William's grip on Kate's hand tightened, and She could see the anger building in his eyes. But before he could speak, Charles's voice cut through the tension. The only thing we need to consider right now is Kate's health and what's best for her family, he said firmly, his tone leaving no room for argument. Everything else can wait. Camilla's lips pressed into a thin line, but she said nothing more. The meeting continued with discussions about medical specialists and treatment options, but Kate couldn't shake the feeling that this was just the beginning of something much larger than her illness. That evening, as Kate tucked her children into bed, she tried to find the words to explain what was happening. George, ever perceptive, seemed to sense that something serious was going on. Charlotte asked if Mummy was sad, and Louis simply wanted extra cuddles. Kate gave them all the love she could, knowing that the coming months would test their family in ways she couldn't yet imagine. Later, as she sat in her bedroom with William, Kate felt overwhelmed by the enormity of what lay ahead. The treatment would be aggressive, and there would be days when she wouldn't be able to care for her children the way she wanted to. There would be public appearances she'd have to miss, duties she couldn't fulfill. What if I can't do this? She whispered to William in the darkness. What if I'm not strong enough? William pulled her closer, his voice fierce with determination. You are the strongest person I know, and you're not doing this alone. We'll get through it together. But even as William spoke words of comfort and strength, Kate couldn't forget the look in Camilla's eyes earlier that day. She had seen disappointment there, and perhaps even frustration. It was as if Camilla viewed Kate's illness not as a tragedy, but as an inconvenience that would disrupt carefully laid plans. The next morning brought a flurry of activity as the palace staff worked to rearrange schedules and prepare for Kate's treatment. Charles arrived at Kensington Palace early, wanting to discuss the children's care and support systems. His genuine concern was evident in every question he asked and every suggestion he made. I want George, Charlotte, and Louis to know they can come to me anytime, he told Kate as they sat in her private study. If you need someone to take them for weekends, or if they need a quiet place to escape when things get difficult, Highgrove is always open to them. Kate felt tears prick her eyes at Charles's kindness. Despite his busy schedule and royal obligations, he was making it clear that his grandchildren and their mother were his priority. It was a side of Charles that the public rarely saw, but one that Kate had come to know and appreciate over the years. Thank you, she said softly. That means more than you know. Charles reached over and patted her hand gently. You're part of our family, Kate. Not just because you married William, but because of who you are. We take care of family. As the days passed, the palace began to feel like a fortress of activity centered around Kate's care. Specialists were consulted, treatment plans were made, and a carefully managed public relations strategy was developed to handle the inevitable media attention. Through it all, Charles remained a constant source of support and strength. However, the tension with Camilla continued to grow. During family dinners at Clarence's house, Kate noticed the way Camilla would steer conversations toward royal duties and public obligations. There were subtle comments about the importance of maintaining appearances and meeting expectations, always delivered with a smile, but carrying an underlying message that Kate found increasingly difficult to ignore. One evening, as Kate was leaving after dinner, she overheard Camilla speaking to one of her ladies-in-waiting in the hallway. It's terribly unfortunate timing, Camilla was saying in a low voice. The Commonwealth tour was going to be so important for the monarchy's image. Now everything will have to be restructured around her treatment schedule. Kate felt as if she had been slapped. She stood frozen in the doorway, unable to believe what she was hearing. Her cancer diagnosis was being discussed like a scheduling conflict, her suffering reduced to an inconvenience for the royal calendar. William found her there moments later, tears streaming down her face. Kate, what's wrong? She couldn't bring herself to repeat what she had heard. Instead, she simply shook her head and allowed William to lead her to the car. But as they drove home to their children, Kate realized that her battle wasn't just going to be against cancer. She was going to have to fight for understanding and compassion from people she had hoped would offer both freely. The first month of treatment was harder than Kate had imagined. The chemotherapy left her exhausted and nauseated, making it difficult to maintain her usual energy with the children. There were days when getting out of bed felt like climbing a mountain, and nights when the fear of what lay ahead kept her awake for hours. Through it all, Charles continued to be a pillar of support. He visited regularly, always bringing small gifts for the children and spending time talking with Kate about everything except her illness. He seemed to understand intuitively that sometimes what she needed most was normalcy, not sympathy. But The contrast between Charles's behavior and Camilla's became more apparent with each passing day. While Charles adjusted his schedule to accommodate family needs, Camilla seemed increasingly frustrated by the disruptions to royal life. At public events, she made careful comments about Kate's absence that walked the line between supportive and critical. "The Princess of Wales is focusing on her health right now," Camilla would say to reporters, "which we all understand is very important. Of course, the work of the monarchy must continue, and we're all committed to fulfilling our duties." The implication was clear, at least to Kate. While she was focusing on her health, others were picking up her slack and fulfilling the duties she couldn't manage. It was a message that made Kate feel guilty and selfish, even though she knew rationally that her illness wasn't her fault. The breaking point came during a family meeting about the upcoming Christmas celebrations. Camilla had prepared a detailed schedule of events and appearances, including several that she had marked as essential for Kate to attend. "The Christmas carol service at Westminster Abbey is particularly important," Camilla explained, pointing to her notes. "It's one of Kate's signature events, and the public will expect to see her there." Kate looked at the date on the calendar and felt her heart sink. It was scheduled for the week following her next round of chemotherapy, when she would likely be at her weakest. "I don't think that's realistic," William said carefully. "Kate's treatment schedule doesn't allow for that kind of commitment right now." Camilla's expression tightened slightly. "William, I understand this is difficult, but we have to think about the bigger picture. The monarchy depends on consistency and reliability. People need to see that we're still functioning normally." "Kate's health is the priority," Charles interjected firmly. "The carol service can be modified or postponed if necessary." "Can it?" Camilla challenged, her composure beginning to crack. "Can we really just cancel or modify every royal engagement indefinitely? What message does that send about our commitment to duty?" The room fell silent. Kate could feel the weight of everyone's attention, and she realized that this moment was about more than just a Christmas carol service. It was about whether her value to the family was measured by her ability to perform royal duties, or by her inherent worth as a person and mother. Charles stood up slowly, his face calm but his eyes blazing with determination. When he spoke, his voice carried the unmistakable authority of someone who was not used to being questioned. "The message it sends," he said quietly, "is that we are a family who takes care of each other. That duty means more than public appearances and photo opportunities. That sometimes doing the right thing requires us to set aside our schedules and put what really matters first." Kate felt a rush of gratitude so strong it nearly overwhelmed her. In that moment, she realized that Charles wasn't just supporting her as the future queen consort or as William's wife. He was protecting her as someone he genuinely cared about, regardless of her royal role. Camilla's face flushed red, but she said nothing. The anger in her eyes was unmistakable, but so was Charles's resolve. For the first time since her diagnosis, Kate felt like she had someone truly powerful in her corner, someone who would fight for her when she didn't have the strength to fight for herself. The days following the Christmas meeting brought an uncomfortable tension that seemed to seep into every corner of the royal household. Kate could feel it during family dinners, in the careful way staff members spoke around certain topics, and in the pointed absence of Camilla from several family gatherings that she would normally attend. Charles, however, seemed unaffected by his wife's displeasure. If anything, he became even more attentive to Kate's needs and more involved in his grandchildren's lives. He established a routine of calling Kate every morning to check on how she was feeling, and he made sure to spend time with George, Charlotte, and Louis whenever they seemed overwhelmed by their mother's condition. Kate was in the middle of her second round of chemotherapy when the situation escalated dramatically. She had been having a particularly difficult day, unable to keep any food down, and feeling so weak that William had to help her walk to the bathroom. The children were staying at Anmer Hall with their nanny, sparing them from seeing their mother at her lowest point. It was during this vulnerable time that Camilla chose to pay an unexpected visit to Kensington Palace. Kate was resting in bed when she heard voices in the hallway outside her room. Through the partially open door, she could see Camilla speaking intently with William, her gestures sharp and her voice carrying an edge that Kate had never heard before. "This has gone on long enough, William," Camilla was saying, her usual diplomatic tone replaced by barely controlled frustration. "I understand that Kate is ill, and I have nothing but sympathy for what she's going through. But the monarchy cannot grind to a halt indefinitely." William's response was calm, but firm. "No one is asking the monarchy to grind to a halt. Other family members are covering Kate's engagements, and the public understands the situation. Do they? Camilla challenged. Because I'm hearing whispers about the future of the monarchy, about whether we're becoming irrelevant, about whether we're failing to meet our obligations to the people. Kate's absence is being noticed, and not in a good way. Kate felt her chest tighten with shame and guilt. Even in her weakened state, she recognized the manipulation in Camilla's words. By framing Kate's illness as a failure to the monarchy, Camilla was placing an impossible burden on someone who was already struggling just to survive each day. That's enough, William said sharply. My wife is fighting for her life, and you're worried about public perception? Kate has given everything to this family and this institution. The least we can do is support her when she needs it most. Camilla's laugh was bitter and cold. Support, yes, but not at the expense of everything we've worked to build. Your father is so focused on protecting Kate that he's lost sight of the bigger picture. This family has weathered scandals, divorces, and deaths, but we've always maintained our dignity and our duty. Now we're making excuses and canceling commitments. And for what? So Kate can take as much time as she needs to recover? Yes, William replied without hesitation. Exactly for that. Kate could hear Camilla's sharp intake of breath, and when she spoke again, her voice was icy with controlled anger. Your father may be willing to let sentiment cloud his judgment, but I won't stand by and watch the monarchy's reputation crumble because of one person's health problems. The sound of footsteps told Kate that William was moving closer to Camilla, and when he spoke, his voice was dangerously low. If I ever hear you speak about my wife that way again, there will be consequences. Kate is not one person, she's family. And if you can't understand that, then perhaps you need to reconsider your own place in this family. The hallway fell silent, and Kate could imagine the confrontation taking place just outside her room. She felt simultaneously grateful for William's defense and horrified that her illness had created such a rift in the family. When she heard Camilla's heels clicking angrily down the hallway, Kate knew that the battle lines had been drawn. William entered the bedroom moments later, his face flushed with anger and his hands trembling slightly. Kate pretended to be asleep, not wanting him to know that she had overheard the conversation. But as he sat down gently on the edge of the bed and took her hand, she could feel the tension radiating from his body. The next day, Charles arrived at Kensington Palace earlier than usual, his expression serious and his manner more formal than Kate had seen in weeks. William met him in the drawing room, and Kate could hear the low murmur of their conversation from her bedroom where she was resting. When Charles came up to see her, his usual warm smile seemed strained. He sat in the chair beside her bed and studied her face with concern. How are you feeling today, my dear? Better, Kate lied, not wanting to add to the stress he was obviously carrying. Charles, is everything all right? Charles was quiet for a long moment, and Kate could see him wrestling with something difficult. Finally, he sighed and leaned forward, his elbows on his knees. Kate, I need you to know that what happened yesterday, the conversation between Camilla and William, it doesn't represent my feelings or my position on this matter. So he knew about the confrontation. Kate felt her cheeks burn with embarrassment, imagining how the argument must have been reported to him. Charles, I don't want to cause problems in your marriage. Maybe Camilla has a point about the royal duties. Stop, Charles said firmly, holding up his hand. I won't have you blaming yourself for Camilla's lack of compassion. What she said was wrong, and I've made that clear to her. Kate could see the pain in Charles's eyes, and she realized that standing up for her had come at a personal cost. The knowledge that her illness was driving a wedge between the king and queen made her feel even worse than the chemotherapy. I'm sorry, she whispered, tears starting to flow. I never wanted any of this to happen. I never wanted to be a burden. Charles immediately moved to sit on the edge of the bed, taking both of her hands in his. Listen to me carefully, Kate. You are not a burden. You are a beloved member of this family, and your health and well-being are more important than any royal engagement or public appearance. Anyone who suggests otherwise is wrong. Over the following weeks, the division within the royal household became increasingly apparent. Staff members seemed to choose sides, with some openly supporting Kate's need for rest and recovery, while others whispered about the disruption to royal schedules and the growing backlog of postponed engagements. Camilla's behavior became pointedly professional whenever she was around Kate. Gone were the warm conversations and shared laughter that had characterized their relationship before the diagnosis. Instead, Camilla maintained a polite but distant demeanor, always correct but never genuinely caring. The contrast with Charles's behavior was stark. He continued to visit regularly, bringing books he thought Kate might enjoy, photos the children had drawn for him to share, and updates on family news that had nothing to do with royal duties. His presence was a constant reminder that she was valued for who she was, not just for what she could do. One afternoon, as Kate was feeling well enough to sit in the garden with George and Charlotte, Charles arrived with Louis, who had been spending the day at Clarence's house. The little boy ran straight to his mother, chattering excitedly about the horses he had seen and the cookies he had eaten with Grandpa. "He's been asking for you all day," Charles told Kate, settling into a garden chair beside her. "I thought some fresh air might do you both good." Kate watched Louis playing with his siblings, their laughter filling the garden with joy. For a moment, she could almost forget about the cancer, the treatments, and the family tension. This was what mattered, these precious moments with the people she loved. "Charles," she said quietly, "I want you to know how much your support means to me. I know it's not easy, especially with Camilla." Charles finished for her. "Kate, my marriage to Camilla doesn't mean I stop being a father to William or a grandfather to your children. It doesn't mean I stop caring about your well-being. Some things are more important than keeping the peace." That evening, as Kate was getting ready for bed, William told her about a conversation he'd had with some of the palace staff. "There are rumors that Camilla has been making inquiries about bringing in a consultant to review the royal schedule and recommend efficiency improvements," he said, his jaw tight with anger. "Apparently, she's concerned about the long-term impact of your absence on public support for the monarchy." Kate felt her stomach drop. The implication was clear. Camilla was building a case for limiting Kate's recovery time and forcing her back into royal duties regardless of her health status. "What did your father say when you told him?" "I haven't told him yet," William admitted. "I wanted to talk to you first." "But, Kate, we can't let her pressure you into anything that could jeopardize your treatment or recovery. Your health comes first, no matter what anyone says about royal obligations." The next morning brought an unexpected development. Charles arrived at Kensington Palace with a stack of official papers and a determined expression that Kate hadn't seen before. He asked to speak with both William and Kate together, and his manner suggested that this was more than a casual visit. "I've made some decisions," he announced once they were settled in the drawing room. "Effective immediately, I'm restructuring the distribution of royal duties. I'll be taking on additional engagements myself, and I've asked and Edward to increase their public appearances. Kate, your recovery remains the priority, and there will be no pressure for you to return to official duties until you and your medical team agree that you're ready." Kate felt a wave of relief wash over her, but she could also see the determination in Charles's eyes that told her this decision hadn't been made lightly. "What does Camilla think about this?" she asked carefully. Charles's expression tightened slightly. "Camilla will adjust her expectations accordingly. This is my decision as king, and it's final." William reached over and squeezed Kate's hand. "Thank you, Pa. This means everything to us." But even as Kate felt grateful for Charles's protection, she couldn't shake the feeling that this victory had come at a significant cost. The king had essentially overruled his queen on a matter she clearly felt strongly about, and Kate knew that Camilla wouldn't forgive or forget such a public rejection of her position. That evening, as she lay in bed reflecting on the day's events, Kate realized that her cancer diagnosis had revealed something important about the royal family. It had shown her who truly cared about her as a person, and who viewed her primarily as a tool for maintaining the monarchy's image and reputation. Charles had proven himself to be genuinely caring and protective, willing to risk his own personal relationships to ensure Kate's well-being. His loyalty wasn't conditional on her ability to fulfill royal duties or maintain public appearances. It was based on love, respect, and a fundamental understanding that family meant more than duty. Camilla, on the other hand, had shown that her support was contingent on Kate's usefulness to the royal institution. When illness made Kate unable to fulfill her expected role, Camilla's compassion had quickly turned to frustration and resentment. Her concern for the monarchy's image had outweighed her concern for Kate's health and recovery. As Kate drifted off to sleep, she felt a deep gratitude for Charles's unwavering support. But she also felt a growing sadness about the relationship with Camilla that seemed to be slipping away. The woman who had once felt like a mother figure was now becoming something closer to an adversary, and Kate wondered if there would ever be a way to bridge the gap that her illness had created between them. The battle for Kate's right to heal without pressure was being won, but the cost to the family was becoming increasingly clear. And Kate couldn't help but wonder what new challenges would emerge as her treatment continued, and the royal household remained divided in their loyalty and priorities. Winter settled over London like a heavy blanket, and Kate's treatment entered its most intensive phase. The chemotherapy had taken a visible toll on her body, but her spirit remained strong, buoyed by the unwavering support of Charles and William. However, the tension between Charles and Camilla had begun to affect the entire royal household in ways that no one could have anticipated. Kate first noticed the change during a family lunch at Windsor Castle. Camilla arrived 20 minutes late, offered polite but minimal conversation, and left immediately after the meal without her usual lingering chat with the grandchildren. Charles seemed to carry the weight of his wife's displeasure like a heavy coat, his usually bright demeanor dimmed by the ongoing conflict. George, now 9 and increasingly perceptive, asked his mother quietly as they were leaving, "Why doesn't Grandmother Camilla talk to us as much anymore?" Kate's heart ached at the question. The children had grown fond of Camilla over the years, and her sudden emotional distance was confusing and hurtful to them. "Grandmother Camilla is just very busy with her royal work right now, darling," Kate explained, hating that she had to make excuses for behavior that was clearly personal rather than professional. The situation reached a critical point during what should have been a routine medical update meeting. Kate's oncologist, Dr. Harrison, had requested a family conference to discuss the next phase of treatment, which would involve a surgical procedure followed by an extended recovery period. Charles, William, and Camilla gathered in the private study at Kensington Palace to hear the details. Dr. Harrison explained that while Kate's response to chemotherapy had been positive, the surgery would require at least 6 weeks of complete rest, followed by several months of limited activity. The princess will need to avoid all stressful situations and focus entirely on her recovery, he emphasized. Any unnecessary pressure or anxiety could negatively impact her healing. Charles nodded gravely, already mentally rearranging his schedule to provide additional support. William asked detailed questions about pain management and physical therapy. But when Dr. Harrison finished his presentation, Camilla's first question revealed her true priorities. "Doctor, when you say several months of limited activity, are we talking about 3 months? 6 months? I need to understand the timeline for planning purposes." Dr. Harrison looked surprised by the focus on scheduling rather than medical concerns. "Your Majesty, recovery timelines vary greatly from patient to patient. We'll need to monitor the princess closely and adjust expectations based on her progress." Camilla's frustration was evident in her voice. "But surely there must be some activities she can manage during recovery? Public appearances that don't require physical strain? We have commitments that have already been postponed multiple times." The room fell silent except for the ticking of an antique clock on the mantelpiece. Kate felt heat rise in her cheeks, both from embarrassment and anger. Even in a medical consultation focused on her survival, Camilla was thinking about royal schedules and public obligations. Charles's response was measured but firm. "Doctor, please proceed with whatever treatment plan you believe is best for Kate's complete recovery. We'll adjust our schedules accordingly." "With respect, Charles," Camilla interjected, her composure beginning to crack, "we can't keep adjusting indefinitely. The Commonwealth tour, the state visit from the Australian Prime Minister, the charity patronage reviews, these aren't just social events. They're vital to maintaining the monarchy's relevance and public support." William stood up abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor. "Are you seriously discussing tour schedules while my wife's doctor is explaining cancer surgery?" Kate could see the shock in Dr. Harrison's eyes as he witnessed this family conflict. The poor man had undoubtedly dealt with many difficult family dynamics in his career, but this level of tension was unusual and deeply uncomfortable. Camilla turned to William, her eyes flashing with barely controlled anger. "Someone has to think about the practical implications, William. I know this is emotional for you, but decisions made in the heat of emotion aren't always wise in the long term." "Emotion?" William's voice rose dangerously. "You call caring about my wife's life emotion? What would you call your obsession with public appearances while she's fighting cancer?" Charles stepped between his son and wife, his face pale but his voice steady. "That's enough. Both of you." He turned to Dr. Harrison with an apologetic expression. "Doctor, thank you for your time and expertise. Please send us any additional information about the surgery and recovery process. We'll be in touch soon to schedule the procedure." After Dr. Harrison left, the 3 royals sat in uncomfortable silence. Kate could feel the weight of unspoken accusations and resentments filling the room. Finally, Camilla broke the silence with words that would change everything. I think we need to have an honest conversation about realistic expectations, she said carefully. Kate's illness has disrupted the royal calendar for months now, and we're reaching a point where the public and the press are beginning to notice the strain on the institution. Charles looked at his wife with an expression Kate had never seen before. Disappointment, so deep it seemed to age him years in moments. What exactly are you suggesting, Camilla? I'm suggesting that we need to make some difficult decisions about Kate's role going forward, Camilla replied, her voice gaining confidence as she continued. Perhaps it's time to consider a reduced royal profile for her, even after recovery. Someone who has been through this kind of medical ordeal might benefit from a quieter life, fewer public pressures. Kate felt as if the air had been sucked out of the room. Camilla wasn't just talking about her current recovery. She was suggesting a permanent reduction in Kate's royal status and responsibilities. It was a polite way of saying that Kate was becoming more trouble than she was worth to the institution. William was on his feet again, his face red with fury. You want to demote my wife because she got cancer? You want to punish her for being sick? I want to protect the monarchy, Camilla shot back, abandoning all pretense of diplomacy. And sometimes that requires making difficult choices about who can and cannot fulfill their obligations reliably. The words hung in the air like poison. Kate felt tears streaming down her face, not from physical pain, but from the devastating realization that Camilla viewed her cancer diagnosis as a character flaw, a failure of duty rather than a medical crisis beyond her control. Charles stood slowly, his movements deliberate and controlled. When he spoke, his voice carried an authority that reminded everyone in the room that he was not just a husband and father, but the King of England. Camilla, he said quietly, you are my wife, and I love you. But if you ever again suggest that Kate's value to this family is conditional on her ability to fulfill royal duties, or that her battle with cancer is somehow a failure on her part, this conversation will be our last on the subject. Camilla's face went white with shock. In all their years together, Charles had never spoken to her with such finality. Charles, you're not thinking clearly. Your affection for Kate is clouding your judgment about what's best for the crown. My affection for Kate is based on her character, her dedication to this family, and her love for my son and grandchildren, Charles replied. Qualities that seem to matter less to you than maintaining appearance schedules and avoiding public relations challenges. Kate could see Camilla's hands trembling with rage and humiliation. Being corrected by Charles in front of William and Kate was clearly devastating to her pride and her sense of position within the family hierarchy. Fine, Camilla said, her voice cold as winter wind. Handle this however you think best, Charles. But don't come to me when the consequences of your sentimentality become apparent. She left the room without another word, her heels clicking angrily against the marble floor. The silence she left behind was heavy with the weight of burned bridges and irreparable damage to relationships. Charles sank back into his chair, suddenly, looking every one of his 75 years. I'm sorry you had to witness that, Kate. Both of you. Kate wiped her eyes and looked at her father-in-law with deep gratitude. Thank you for standing up for me. I know it wasn't easy. It was the easiest thing in the world, Charles replied firmly. Family protects family, no matter the cost. But, as the days passed, the cost became increasingly apparent. Camilla began spending more time at Ray Mill, her country house, avoiding family gatherings and royal events where she would have to interact with Charles, William, or Kate. When she did appear at official functions, her demeanor was professionally correct, but emotionally distant. The palace staff began to walk on eggshells, unsure of how to navigate the obvious tension between the king and queen. Some took subtle sides, while others tried desperately to remain neutral and professional. The comfortable family atmosphere that had characterized royal gatherings for years was replaced by careful politeness and unspoken grievances. Charles threw himself into his role as Kate's primary supporter with even more determination than before. He personally oversaw arrangements for her surgery, consulted with additional specialists, and made sure that every detail of her care was handled with the utmost attention. His devotion to her well-being seemed to intensify in proportion to Camilla's disapproval. One evening, as Kate was preparing for surgery the following week, Charles arrived at Kensington Palace with a small wrapped package. Inside was a delicate silver bracelet with a charm that read strength. This belonged to my mother, he told Kate quietly. She wore it during some of the most difficult times of her reign. I thought you might like to have it during your surgery and recovery. Kate was overwhelmed by the gesture. The bracelet represented not just Charles's support, but his recognition of her as a true member of the royal family, worthy of wearing jewelry that had belonged to Queen Elizabeth II. It was a powerful symbol that directly contradicted Camilla's suggestion that Kate's role should be diminished. "I'll treasure it always," Kate whispered, fastening the bracelet around her wrist. "Not just because it's beautiful, but because of what it means coming from you." Charles smiled, but Kate could see the sadness in his eyes. The family conflict was taking its toll on him, creating stress and division in his personal life that mirrored the pressures of his royal responsibilities. He was being forced to choose between supporting Kate and maintaining harmony with his wife, and he had chosen Kate without hesitation. As Kate prepared for surgery, she realized that the battle over her right to heal without pressure had been won, but at tremendous cost to the royal family's unity. Charles's unwavering support had given her the strength to face her medical challenges, but it had also created a rift with Camilla that seemed unlikely to heal. The king had stood firm beside his daughter-in-law, proving that his commitment to family superseded even his desire for marital harmony. But as Camilla's anger settled into a cold, silent disapproval that permeated the royal household, Kate wondered if the price of Charles's loyalty would ultimately prove too high for everyone involved. Tomorrow she would face surgery, but she would do so knowing that she had the absolute support of the most important man in the royal family. Whether that support would be enough to carry them all through the challenges ahead remained to be seen. The surgery was successful, but Kate's recovery proved more challenging than anyone had anticipated. The weeks that followed were a blur of hospital visits, physical therapy sessions, and quiet days at home where simply sitting up for an hour felt like a major accomplishment. Through it all, Charles maintained his vigil, visiting almost daily and ensuring that Kate never felt alone or forgotten. Camilla's silence, however, spoke louder than any words could have. She had not visited Kate once since the surgery, despite multiple invitations and updates about Kate's progress. Her absence was noted not just by the family, but by palace staff and eventually by members of the press who were accustomed to seeing the royal family present a united front during difficult times. The first public sign of the rift came during a charity gala that Camilla attended alone. When asked by reporters about Kate's recovery, Camilla's response was diplomatically correct, but notably cold. "The Princess of Wales is receiving excellent medical care and taking the time she needs to recover. The rest of the royal family continues to fulfill our obligations to the people." The subtle emphasis on the rest of the royal family and the phrase, "taking the time she needs," carried an unmistakable undertone of criticism. Royal watchers and journalists immediately picked up on the carefully chosen words, and speculation about tension within the family began to appear in newspapers and magazines. Charles was attending a Commonwealth ceremony when he learned about Camilla's comments. According to palace sources who spoke anonymously to Kate weeks later, his reaction was swift and decisive. He immediately canceled the remainder of his official engagements for the day and returned to Clarence's house for what staff described as an intense private discussion with the Queen. The conversation, according to whispered reports from household staff, could be heard through the heavy oak doors of Charles's private study. While the specific words were unclear, the tone was unmistakably one of serious disagreement. When Camilla emerged an hour later, her face was flushed and her usual composure was clearly strained. Kate learned about these developments from William, who had been briefed by his father's private secretary. As she lay in her bed at Kensington Palace, still weak from surgery but gradually regaining her strength, Kate felt a complex mix of emotions. She was grateful for Charles's continued protection, but she was also deeply troubled by the ongoing conflict her illness had created. "I think I should talk to Camilla," Kate told William one evening as they sat together in her bedroom. "Maybe if I explain how I'm feeling, if I show her that I understand her concerns about the royal duties." William shook his head firmly. "Kate, you have nothing to apologize for or explain. You didn't choose to get cancer, and you're not responsible for Camilla's inability to show compassion during your illness." But Kate couldn't shake the feeling that there must be some way to bridge the gap that had opened in the family. The idea of the royal household remaining permanently divided because of her health crisis was almost unbearable. She began to formulate a plan, despite William's objections and her doctor's advice to avoid stressful situations. 3 weeks after her surgery, Kate asked Charles to arrange a private meeting with Camilla. Charles was reluctant, worried that any emotional confrontation might set back Kate's recovery. But Kate insisted, and eventually Charles agreed to facilitate the conversation, with the condition that he would be present to ensure things didn't escalate beyond Kate's ability to handle. The meeting was arranged for a quiet Tuesday afternoon at Clarence's house. Kate, still moving slowly and tiring easily, was driven there by William, who waited in another room while the three principals gathered in Charles's private sitting room. The atmosphere was tense from the moment Camilla entered the room, her posture rigid and her expression carefully neutral. "Camilla," Kate began, her voice still weak but determined, "I wanted to thank you for coming. I know this situation has been difficult for everyone, and I feel responsible for the tension it's created in the family." Camilla's eyebrows rose slightly at Kate's words. "You feel responsible? My illness has disrupted so many plans and created so much uncertainty," Kate continued. "I know how much you care about the monarchy and its reputation, and I understand your frustration with having to constantly rearrange schedules and cancel commitments because of my health problems." Charles shifted uncomfortably in his chair, clearly not liking the direction of Kate's apology. But Kate pressed on, determined to address Camilla's concerns directly. "I want you to know that I'm committed to returning to my full royal duties as soon as I'm medically able. I don't want my illness to be used as an excuse to reduce my role or responsibilities permanently. The monarchy means too much to me for that." For a moment, Kate thought she saw something soften in Camilla's expression. But when Camilla spoke, her words were carefully measured and revealed little of her true feelings. "Kate, I appreciate your commitment to your royal duties. That has never been in question. But I think what we've all learned from this experience is the importance of having realistic expectations and backup plans when health issues arise." Charles leaned forward, his voice carrying a warning tone. "Backup plans for what exactly?" Camilla turned to her husband, and, for the first time, Kate saw a flash of the anger that had been simmering beneath the surface for months. "Backup plans for situations where key members of the royal family are unable to fulfill their obligations for extended periods. We can't continue to operate on the assumption that everyone will always be available and healthy. Every organization should have contingency plans," Charles agreed carefully. "But those plans shouldn't be used to permanently diminish someone's role based on temporary health challenges." "Temporary?" Camilla's voice rose slightly before she caught herself and regained her composure. "Charles, Kate has been unable to perform royal duties for nearly 6 months. The Commonwealth tour has been postponed twice. We've had to cancel or reassign dozens of engagements. At what point do we acknowledge that this isn't just a temporary inconvenience?" Kate felt tears forming in her eyes, not from physical pain but from the stark realization of how Camilla truly viewed her illness. In Camilla's mind, Kate's cancer wasn't a tragic health crisis that deserved compassion and support. It was a performance failure that threatened the efficiency of the royal institution. 6 months, Kate repeated quietly. 6 months to fight for my life, to undergo surgery and chemotherapy, to try to stay alive for my children and my husband. I'm sorry that's been inconvenient for the royal calendar." The words hung in the air like an accusation. Camilla's face flushed red, and Kate could see that her careful diplomatic mask was finally slipping. "That's not what I meant, and you know it," Camilla said sharply. "I have nothing but sympathy for what you've been through. But sympathy doesn't solve the practical problems your absence has created." Charles stood up abruptly, his patience finally exhausted. "Practical problems? Camilla, listen to yourself. You're talking about Kate's battle with cancer as if it's a scheduling conflict. I'm talking about reality." Camilla shot back, abandoning all pretense of diplomatic calm. "I'm talking about the fact that the monarchy doesn't exist to accommodate one person's health problems, no matter how tragic they might be. We have obligations to the Commonwealth, to the people of Britain, to institutions that depend on our reliability and consistency. And we have obligations to each other," Charles replied, his voice rising to match his wife's. "We have obligations to show compassion, to support family members during their darkest hours, to demonstrate that our humanity is more important than our schedules." Kate struggled to her feet, feeling dizzy and overwhelmed by the intensity of the argument raging around her. "Please stop," she said weakly. "This is exactly what I was afraid of. My illness is destroying this family." Both Charles and Camilla turned to look at Kate, and for a moment the room fell silent. Kate could see concern in Charles's eyes, but in Camilla's face she saw something that chilled her to the bone. Not concern or sympathy, but a cold calculation that seemed to view Kate's emotional distress as further evidence of her unsuitability for royal life. "Perhaps," Camilla said quietly, "this conversation has proven my point better than any schedule conflict could have." The words were like a slap across Kate's face. Camilla was suggesting that Kate's emotional reaction to being criticized for having cancer was somehow proof that she wasn't strong enough for royal responsibilities. It was a level of cruelty that Kate hadn't expected, even in their worst moments. Charles moved to Kate's side, his arm going around her shoulders protectively. When he looked at Camilla, his expression was one of profound disappointment mixed with something that looked very much like disgust. "I think," he said quietly, "that we've all heard enough for today. Kate needs to rest, and we all need to think very carefully about what we've said here." Camilla gathered her purse and coat with sharp, angry movements. Before leaving, she turned back to address Kate directly, her voice cold and formal. "I hope your recovery continues to go well, Kate. And I hope that when you do return to royal duties, you'll do so with a better understanding of the responsibilities and expectations that come with your position." After Camilla left, Kate collapsed back into her chair, emotionally and physically exhausted. Charles sat beside her, taking her hands in his with gentle concern. "I'm sorry you had to go through that," he said softly. "I had hoped that speaking directly might help her understand, but I was wrong." Kate looked at Charles through her tears, seeing the pain in his eyes that reflected her own. "She hates me now, doesn't she? She thinks I'm weak and selfish and not worthy of being in this family." "What Camilla thinks doesn't change what's true," Charles replied firmly. "You are one of the strongest, most dedicated people I've ever known. Your grace under pressure, your love for William and the children, your commitment to your charitable work, none of that has been diminished by your illness. If anything, watching you fight this battle has only increased my respect and admiration for you." As Kate was driven home to Kensington Palace, she realized that the meeting with Camilla had clarified something important, even though it hadn't achieved the reconciliation she had hoped for. The Queen Consort's position was clear. Kate's value to the royal family was entirely dependent on her ability to perform public duties without disruption or inconvenience. When illness made that impossible, Kate became not just useless to the institution, but actively harmful to it. Charles's position was equally clear. Kate's value to the family was based on her character, her relationships, and her inherent worth as a person. Her illness didn't diminish that value. It revealed the depth of love and loyalty she inspired in those who truly knew her. The battle lines were drawn, and there would be no compromise between these fundamentally different worldviews. Kate's cancer had revealed not just the state of her physical health, but the true nature of the relationships within the royal family. As she settled into bed that night, wearing the silver bracelet that had belonged to Queen Elizabeth II, Kate realized that she had gained something precious in Charles's unwavering support. But she had also lost something she had thought was equally precious: the relationship with Camilla that had once felt like a second mother's love. The silence that followed their confrontation was different from the tension that had preceded it. This was the heavy, permanent silence of a relationship that had been broken beyond repair, and Kate wondered if the royal family would ever recover from the damage her illness had revealed in its foundations. Spring arrived early that year, bringing with it the first signs of Kate's physical recovery and the final resolution of the family crisis that had torn through the royal household like a storm. As daffodils bloomed in the gardens of Kensington Palace, Kate found herself strong enough to walk outside without assistance, to play gently with her children, and to begin contemplating a gradual return to some of her royal duties. The silence from Camilla had become absolute. After their confrontation at Clarence House, she had retreated into a world of official obligations and public appearances, maintaining her royal responsibilities with mechanical precision while avoiding any personal interaction with Kate, William, or even Charles when possible. Family dinners became rare, and when they did occur, Camilla's presence was marked by polite conversation that never strayed from safe, impersonal topics. Charles, meanwhile, had doubled down on his support for Kate. He established a new routine of weekly family visits that didn't depend on Camilla's availability, and he began involving himself more directly in his grandchildren's lives. George, Charlotte, and Louis had grown especially close to their grandfather during Kate's illness, and his consistent presence had helped them navigate the uncertainty and fear that came with having a seriously ill mother. The palace staff had adapted to the new normal with professional discretion, but the effects of the royal rift were impossible to hide entirely. Scheduling meetings required careful coordination to ensure Charles and Camilla wouldn't be forced into prolonged personal interactions. Social events were planned with seating arrangements that kept tensions to a minimum. Even the dogs seemed to sense the change in atmosphere, with Camilla's beloved terriers staying close to her side while avoiding the areas where Kate and the children spent their time. Kate's first public appearance after surgery was carefully orchestrated by Charles himself. He chose a small charity event focused on cancer research, a cause that held obvious personal significance, and would allow Kate to speak from genuine experience rather than scripted talking points. The venue was intimate, the guest list was limited to trusted supporters, and the media access was strictly controlled. As Kate prepared for the event, she felt nervous in a way she hadn't experienced since her earliest royal engagements. Months of illness and treatment had changed her physically. She was thinner than before, her hair was just beginning to grow back, and she tired more easily than she once had. But, more significantly, the family crisis had changed her emotionally. She no longer took the support of the royal institution for granted, and she was acutely aware of how her performance would be judged by those who questioned her continuing value to the monarchy. Charles arrived at Kensington Palace an hour before they were scheduled to leave, bringing with him a small bouquet of flowers from his own gardens and an expression of paternal pride that immediately put Kate at ease. "You look lovely, my dear," he said, studying her outfit with approval. "But, more importantly, you look like yourself again, strong and determined and ready to make a difference." Kate felt tears prick her eyes at his kindness. "I'm nervous," she admitted. "It's been so long since I've done anything public, and I know people will be watching to see if I'm really well enough to be back." "People will be watching to see the Kate they've always loved and admired," Charles corrected gently. "Your grace, your compassion, your genuine care for others. Cancer couldn't touch those qualities, and they're what matter most." The event itself was everything Charles had hoped it would be. Kate spoke movingly about her own experience with cancer treatment, connecting personally with patients and families in a way that felt authentic and unforced. She listened more than she talked, asked thoughtful questions, and showed the natural empathy that had always been her greatest strength in royal work. The media coverage was overwhelmingly positive, focusing on Kate's courage in returning to public life and her obvious commitment to using her experience to help others. But, for Kate, the most meaningful moment came when Charles appeared at her side during the final group photo, his presence a visible symbol of the royal family's support for her return to active duty. Camilla was notably absent from the event, despite the fact that cancer charities had always been among her own patronages. Her absence was explained officially as a scheduling conflict, but royal reporters immediately noted the significance of the Queen consort missing such an important milestone in Kate's recovery. That evening, as Kate relaxed at home with William and the children, she felt a sense of accomplishment tempered by sadness. The day had proven that she was ready to resume her royal role, but it had also highlighted how fundamentally the family dynamics had changed. The united front that the royals had once presented to the public was now fractured, with clear divisions that couldn't be hidden indefinitely. 2 weeks later, the situation came to a head during the Queen's official birthday celebration. As one of the most important events in the royal calendar, it required the participation of all senior royals, making it impossible for Camilla to avoid being in the same space as Kate and Charles for an extended period. The day began with the traditional trooping the color ceremony, where Kate made her second public appearance since surgery. Standing on the palace balcony beside William and the children, she felt strong and confident, ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead. Charles stood nearby with obvious pride in his daughter-in-law's recovery and return to duty. Camilla, positioned at the other end of the balcony, maintained her professional demeanor throughout the public portions of the day. But the real test came during the private family luncheon that followed the ceremony. For the first time in months, the entire immediate royal family was gathered in one room, and the tension was palpable. The conversation during lunch was stilted and formal, with everyone carefully avoiding topics that might lead to conflict. Kate found herself studying Camilla's face, looking for any sign of softening or reconciliation, but finding only the same cold politeness that had characterized their interactions since the confrontation at Clarence House. It was Louis, innocent and unaware of the adult tensions surrounding him, who finally broke through the artificial pleasantries. Looking across the table at Camilla with the direct honesty that only a young child can manage, he asked, "Grandmother Camilla, why don't you come to see Mummy anymore? She's all better now." The silence that followed Lewis's question was deafening. Kate felt her cheeks burn with embarrassment, while William's jaw tightened with barely controlled anger. Charles looked directly at his wife, waiting for her response with an expression that suggested this might be the moment of truth for their marriage. Camilla's face cycled through several emotions: surprise, discomfort, and something that might have been shame. For a moment, Kate thought she might finally address the elephant in the room, might find a way to explain her behavior in terms that a child could understand, and that might open the door to healing. Instead, Camilla smiled at Lewis with practiced royal grace and said, "Grandmother has been very busy with her work, darling. But I'm glad to see that Mummy is feeling better." It was a perfectly adequate response for a child's question, but it revealed nothing about Camilla's true feelings and offered no path forward for the adults in the room. The moment passed, conversation resumed, and the family finished their meal with the same careful politeness that had characterized the entire gathering. But after lunch, as the family was preparing to leave, Charles asked to speak privately with Camilla in his study. Kate and William were gathering the children's things when they heard raised voices coming from behind the closed door. The conversation was brief but intense, and when Camilla emerged 20 minutes later, her face was pale, and her usual composure was clearly strained. She left immediately without saying goodbye to Kate or the children, citing urgent business that required her attention. Charles emerged from his study looking older and more tired than Kate had ever seen him, but also somehow relieved, as if a difficult decision had finally been made. "Is everything all right?" Kate asked him quietly, concerned about the obvious toll the confrontation had taken. Charles looked at her with eyes that held both sadness and resolution. "Everything will be all right, my dear. Some things simply need to be said clearly, even when they're difficult to hear." In the days that followed, palace staff began to notice changes in the household routine that suggested permanent shifts in family relationships. Camilla's appearances at family events became even more infrequent, and when she did attend, her interactions with Charles were noticeably formal and distant. She maintained her public duties with unwavering professionalism, but the warmth and partnership that had once characterized her marriage to Charles seemed to have disappeared. Charles, in contrast, seemed to have found a new sense of purpose in his role as family patriarch. His support for Kate's continued recovery and return to royal duties became even more visible and decisive. He began including her in planning sessions for major royal events, seeking her input on charitable initiatives, and making it clear to everyone that her position in the family hierarchy was secure and valued. The children, with their natural resilience, adapted to the new family dynamics more easily than the adults. They accepted that Grandmother Camilla was very busy and found comfort in Grandfather Charles's increased presence in their lives. George began joining Charles for horseback riding lessons. Charlotte started helping him tend his garden at Highgrove, and Lewis discovered a shared love of reading that led to regular storytelling sessions. As summer approached, Kate realized that while her cancer battle was largely won, the family crisis it had triggered was reaching its own resolution. The heavy silence that had settled between Charles and Camilla wasn't just the absence of conversation. It was the quiet that comes after a storm has passed, and the landscape has been permanently altered. Charles had made his choice clear through his actions rather than words. When forced to choose between supporting Kate's recovery and maintaining harmony with Camilla, he had chosen Kate without hesitation and without regret. His loyalty wasn't conditional on Kate's ability to fulfill royal duties or avoid health problems. It was based on his fundamental belief that family members support each other through their darkest moments. Camilla's silence had become her own choice. Rather than acknowledge the cruelty of her position during Kate's illness, rather than apologize for viewing cancer as a performance failure, she had retreated into a world where professional obligations mattered more than personal relationships. Her anger had indeed faded, but it had been replaced by something worse, a cold indifference that suggested the wounds inflicted during Kate's illness would never fully heal. As Kate stood in her garden one evening, watching her children play while Charles read nearby, she reflected on the journey that had brought them to this point. Her cancer diagnosis had initially felt like the worst thing that could happen to her family. But, in fighting the disease, she had discovered reserves of strength she didn't know she possessed. More importantly, she had learned who truly loved her unconditionally and who viewed her primarily as a tool for advancing institutional interests. The royal family would continue to function, presenting a united front to the public while managing private divisions with careful professionalism. But the relationships between its members had been forever changed by the crisis that began with a phone call on a quiet morning and ended with the heavy silence of words that could never be taken back. Charles had stood firm beside Kate when she needed him most, and in doing so, he had revealed the true meaning of loyalty, love, and leadership. Camilla's anger had faded into silence, but that silence spoke volumes about character, priorities, and the choices people make when tested by circumstances beyond their control. In the end, Kate had survived both cancer and the family crisis it triggered. She had emerged stronger, more confident in her place within the royal family, and deeply grateful for the love and support that had carried her through her darkest hours. The price of that survival had been high for everyone involved, but Kate no longer doubted her worth or her welcome in the family that Charles led with such unwavering dedication to those he loved.